Okay, welcome to the Personal Finance Consumer Protection presentation lecture for Unit 5. This presentation lecture does not have a note guide associated with it, so just please make sure that you proceed through the content and answer the embedded questions as they come up. Once you have completed the presentation lecture, please make sure that you do submit the activity in Classroom so that you get credit for completing it. Okay, so let's get started. What is consumer fraud? So when it comes to consumer protection, consumers are being protected against an act which is known as fraud or a fraudulent act, which is some way to misrepresent a consumer or to take advantage of a consumer's financial resources without the knowledge of that particular consumer. During the course of this presentation lecture, we'll talk about some different consumer fraudulent terms, as well as ways you can protect yourself if any of these fraudulent acts were to happen to you as a consumer. All right, so let's first start off with taking a look at different fraudulent terms. Some of these you may or may not be familiar with. Scholarship or financial aid scam. For those of you seniors, this is going to be a very advantageous fraudulent term and scam to be aware of as you getting ready to enter your institution of higher learning. Sweepstakes scam, phishing scams, which usually take place during email, job scams, auction fraud, financial fraud, and then identity fraud, which I'm sure a lot of us are quite familiar with. All right, so let's take a look at our first one. Our first term, scholarship financial aid scam. Fake scholarships or financial aid agencies. Be aware of these as you are preparing to meet your financial needs for your institution of higher learning. Most of you have been applying for scholarships and or financial aid. There are scams associated with these, so make sure that what you are applying for is authentic. Sweepstakes scams. We've seen these before. A scam in which a company tells someone that they have won a sweepstakes prize, but that the winner must first pay a fee to ensure delivery of the prize. Seriously? I mean, come on. Rule number one about fraudulent consumer scams is if it sounds too good to be true, it is. If there is a sweepstakes offering you $5,000 if you pay $200 in order to confirm that you are the winner and that your prize money can be delivered, no, absolutely not. That is not the way that things work. So don't fall into those particular scams. Phishing. Not to be confused with going out and putting a line in the water and trying to catch fish out of a river or a lake. Phishing is eliciting private information from a web surfer in a fraudulent way. These are usually done via email or pop-ups on your computer in your email, I'm sorry, not email, but your web browser. When you might click on something, you might be being phished. Someone's trying to acquire information about you through the phishing scam. There's also job scams. Job scams make upbeat promises about your chances of employment, and virtually all of them ask you to pay them for their services before you get a job. You might see these through different employment or professional social media platforms such as LinkedIn or others, so be aware of job scams. Auction fraud. What is auction fraud? Auction fraud is misrepresentation of a product advertised for sale through an internet auction site or non-delivery of products purchased through the internet through an internet auction site. So be very careful. Auction fraud takes place in sites such as eBay, where the auction is open for a significant amount of time. You can bid a price to purchase an item, and if you end up with the highest bid at the end of the auction period, normally you are awarded that item for the price that you have agreed to pay. Financial fraud, any attempt to deceive another for financial gain. Want to be careful of this. We also want to protect our financials because that is going to be obviously the biggest resource that we have towards moving into independent life. Having proper finances, having them organized properly is going to be very, very important. Therefore, we want to be aware of financial fraud. Identity fraud. Acquisition and use of a person's private identity information, usually for financial gain, but not always. If you all of a sudden see your bank accounts being drained out, credit cards all of a sudden being maxed out, somebody has gotten a hold of your identity and is using it for their own personal gain. So obviously you want to get that stopped immediately and do all the necessary precautions in order to protect your identity from fraud. All right, so those are some different fraud scams that are out there that we may possibly become victims of some type of a perpetrator trying to take advantage of us as consumers. Now, when it comes to fraud, there are some facts that we also need to be aware of, not just the particular scams that are there. Let's take a look at identity theft, which is one that is quite common. Last year, an estimated 10 million Americans were victims of identity theft. That's quite a bit. That's a lot of individuals. Individuals lost an estimated of $5 billion. Identity theft is a big time fraud industry. Financial institutions and businesses lost more than $48 billion in the past year due to identity theft. So, a significant consumer fraudulent scam where there is big dollars to be made, and the victims are us, the average everyday consumer, losing financial resources. All right. Now, the most common victim complaints in 2010, this is a little bit old, yes, it is 10 years old, were non-delivery of payment merchandise, scams impersonating the FBI, and identity thefts. Victims of these crimes reported losing hundreds of millions of dollars. Very, very it's almost getting to the point now in our lives where we have to be very careful about any type of interaction in regards of sharing personal information and financial information because of the possibility of that information being acquired for fraudulent acts. Now, if you are in a situation where a fraudulent act has taken place and you have been the victim of it, there are some obvious, not precautions, but there are some avenues that you can take to resurrect the situation. So let's take a look at some fictional scenarios. What should they do? Brad has taken his new car in for some repairs several consecutive times since he bought the car 10 months ago. What should he do? What action is available to him to best resolve his issue? And the answer is contact consumer or government agency. Better than returning to store, contact company, or take legal action. Now, we're going to go through a number of different scenarios here that are going to apply to any one of these different areas, which is a way for consumers to fight back against consumer fraud. All right. In this situation, Justin was injured and needed medical assistance when properly using a fan she had recently purchased. Okay, what do we need to do here? Take legal action. Obviously, this was not a safe product, and therefore the company that has manufactured the product would be liable for our injury. What about the next one? Ellie keeps getting phone calls offering her investment opportunities even though she has told the company that no longer to call her. So she wants to be on the no-call list. They are not listening. Then she can contact the consumer or government agency in order to get her request fulfilled. Next one. Thomas was charged the wrong price for several items at a local store. Okay, so what do you do in this situation? If you are a consumer, you return to the store, indicate that you were properly charged, and make sure that that situation is resurrected. Mary received a late payment notice for a credit account that she had paid off several months ago. She is under the impression that this has been paid off. However, she's receiving notifications that it is not. So she wants to contact the company. Contact the company, find out what happened in terms of billing, why there were errors, and why she's still being notified that there's a balance still existing on her account. All right. So when it comes to solving consumer problems, here's what the consumer is going to want to do. Number one, collect records. Make sure that you start a file about your complaint. The more information that you have and evidence of consumer fraud taking place, the better your case is going to be. Make sure to keep copies of sales receipts at all times, repair orders, warranties, canceled checks, and even contracts. You will want to go back to where you made the purchase if that's where the issue is. Make sure that you have your information. Be calm. Calmly and accurately explain the problem and what action you would like to take. Talk with the supervisor or manager if necessary. So if you are talking to a particular individual, a customer service representative, and not getting the particular resolution to the situation that you are desiring, make sure that you talk with the supervisor or manager. Allow each person that you contact time to resolve the problem before going to the next person, and make sure that you keep a record of all of your efforts. Keep a journal as you go through solving this consumer issue. Don't give up. Just because you're having problem solving doesn't mean it's not going to be solved in the future. Call or write the person responsible for consumer complaints at the company's headquarters. Make sure that your situation is documented with the proper individual. Make sure that you are able to describe the problem. Why are you unsatisfied? What, if anything, have you done already? And describe what you think is a fair solution. And then go back and forth in a negotiated pattern with the individual or with with the company that you have the discrepancy with in order to get to that resolution. Writing a letter of complaint, which is an activity that we will practice. Where to write? To the head of the company or the person who handles consumer complaints. Can usually be found on the company's website. Now, what do you want to write, or what should this letter of complaint consist of? Well, your name, address, account number, if appropriate, your purchase, name of product, serial numbers, date of location and purchase, state problem and then give the history, ask for specific action. This is the resolution I'm looking for. Make sure to enclose any copies of documents regarding your problem. Allow time for the action or response. Maybe even designate in your letter a time for the action or response so that you are notified that the letter was received and that action is being taken. And then also include how you can be reached. Email, phone call, combination of both. Writing the letter of complaint, there's a couple do's and don'ts. What you don't want to do is write an angry, sarcastic, or threatening letter. It'll get immediately discarded and thrown into the trash. Make sure that you send the original documents. Don't do that. You want to make sure that you have record of your complaint as well. What you do want to do is type your letter if possible or handwrite neatly, and make sure you keep copies of all letters and other documents that were sent to the company or that you had received from the company. When you write a letter issuing a complaint, use correct business letter format. Now this example here in the right hand side is what's known as block letter format. Nothing is being indented, everything is left aligned. It is very neatly and professionally written and ready to be distributed to the proper person or proper department in order to address your complaint. And that concludes the presentation lecture on consumer protection. Make sure that you have answered all of the embedded questions. Make sure that you complete the viewing of the presentation lecture. And once you have done so, go back into Classroom and submit the activity so that I can confirm that you have completed the viewing of this presentation lecture. I will see you next time we meet in class.